Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes exit poll results from Ohio issue one ballot measure on abortion rights. BlackRock set to invest $550 million in Occidental direct air capture project. Israel says its forces operating in heart of Gaza City. Reoccupying Gaza, not the right thing to do, White House tells Israel. Geopolitics in focus as leaders gather for new economy forum. Exit poll results from Ohio issue one ballot measure on abortion rights. Washington Post. Preliminary exit poll results from the election in Ohio indicate that a majority of men and women voted in favor of issue 1, which would enshrine the right to abortion in the state's constitution. The gender gap was smaller than in the 2020 presidential election. Support for the measure was highest among Black and Hispanic voters, while white voters were more divided. Young voters were overwhelmingly in favor of issue 1, while middle-aged and older voters were more divided. College graduates were more supportive than those with less education. Democrats overwhelmingly voted yes, while Republicans voted no. Liberals and moderates voted yes, while conservatives voted no. The majority of Ohio voters said abortion should be legal in either all or most cases. Those who disagreed with the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade were more likely to support the measure. A larger share of Biden voters than Trump voters turned out to vote in the Ohio election, and the majority of Biden voters supported issue 1. Married men and women were split on the issue, while unmarried men and women were more supportive. White evangelical voters were more likely to vote against the constitutional amendment. These preliminary results are based on interviews with randomly selected voters as they exited voting places in Ohio on November 7, as well as telephone surveys of early voters. BlackRock set to invest $550 million in Occidental direct air capture project. Financial Times. Investment firm BlackRock is set to invest $550 million in Stratos, the world's largest direct air capture (DAC) project. Developed by Occidental Petroleum, the project aims to extract carbon emissions from the atmosphere. The joint venture between BlackRock and Occidental is one of the largest ever investments in DAC technology. DAC involves removing CO2 emissions from the air and either burying them underground or reusing them in building materials, agricultural products, or fuels. Some environmentalists question the scalability of DAC and its impact on the transition to cleaner forms of energy. Israel says its forces operating in heart of Gaza City. Nikkei Asia. Israel has said that its forces are operating deep inside Gaza City in their battle against Hamas in the Palestinian enclave, and that the group's leader is trapped inside a bunker. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that Israeli soldiers had advanced to the heart of Gaza City and were tightening the noose on Hamas. He added that Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's most senior leader in Gaza, was isolated in his bunker and cut off from his surroundings. The Israeli military said that Hamas militants had fired anti-tank missiles at Israeli forces from nearby hospitals, and that soldiers had found weapons hidden in a school in northern Gaza. Meanwhile, Palestinian health officials said that at least 23 people were killed in 2 Israeli airstrikes on Tuesday in the southern Gaza cities of Khan Yunis and Rafah. Reoccupying Gaza, not the right thing to do, White House tells Israel. New York Times. The White House has warned Israel against reoccupying Gaza, after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu suggested that Israel could hold a security role in the territory once the war is over. The White House National Security spokesman, John Kirby, stated that President Biden maintains his position that Israeli reoccupation is not the right thing to do. President Biden has previously said that it would be a big mistake for Israel to reoccupy Gaza. However, the U.S. has offered staunch support for Israel since the October 7 terrorist attack by Hamas, and is now trying to balance its backing for Israel with calls for the protection of Palestinian non-combatants and for humanitarian pauses in the fighting. Geopolitics in focus as leaders gather for new economy forum. Bloomberg. Chinese Vice President Han Zheng and Saudi Arabia's Minister of Investment Khalid Al-Falih are set to address the Bloomberg New Economy Forum in Singapore. The 3-day forum will discuss various issues including trade, climate change, energy security, and war. Han's opening remarks may indicate China's stance, as it seeks to improve its strained ties with the U.S. ahead of President Joe Biden's meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Other speakers at the forum include Ken Griffin, CEO of Citadel, and Sergio Ermotti, CEO of UBS Group AG. The forum will also feature discussions on economic statecraft, trade flows, and supply chains, as well as sessions on climate change and international relations. EV markets surge toward $57 trillion sparks global flashpoints. Bloomberg. The transition from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, EVs, is creating tensions across the globe, according to Bloomberg. The article covers 5 examples of how the EV revolution is causing geopolitical, environmental, and societal problems around the world. In Mexico, Chinese automakers are ramping up sales of EVs to local consumers while Western automakers expand to sell across the northern border. In Thailand, Chinese investment in EV manufacturing and sales is increasing rapidly, with Japanese and Western automakers losing ground. In Canada, permits to dig up EV minerals are being slowed by concerns over environmental degradation. U.S. suspends Indo-Pacific talks on key aspects of digital trade, lawmakers. Yahoo! The Biden administration has suspended talks on some key digital trade aspects of its Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Initiative, Democratic lawmakers said on Tuesday, as negotiators from 14 countries race to finish some agreements ahead of a major Pacific Rim summit next week. She expected to speak at dinner for U.S. business executives on APEC sidelines. South China Morning Post. A senior Chinese official and his delegation are set to attend a dinner with members of the U.S. business community on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, summit in San Francisco. The invitation, sent out by 2 organizations devoted to bilateral ties, did not disclose the identity of the official who will be headlining the event, but Bloomberg reported that it would be Chinese President Xi Jinping. The event, scheduled for November 15, is expected to draw a large crowd, including top CEOs from APEC-based companies. One of Xi's top priorities during his U.S. visit is to calm foreign investors who are increasingly nervous about doing business in China. The U.S. and China have recently engaged in talks to improve relations and address issues such as climate cooperation, nuclear arms control, and maritime concerns. A rusting shipwreck becomes a flashpoint in the South China Sea. Bloomberg. China is using risky military behavior and coercion tactics to keep U.S. forces away from the Western Pacific, according to Hal Brands in Bloomberg Opinion. He highlights 2 potential flashpoints: the ongoing face-off between China and the Philippines over Second Thomas Shoal in the South China Sea, and the increasing frequency of unsafe intercepts of foreign aircraft and ships. Brands argues that China is trying to raise the risks for foreign forces operating in the region in the hope that the U.S. and its allies will stay away. However, he warns that miscalculation could lead to a crisis. Mourning in America eludes Biden despite economic gains. New York Times. A New York Times/Siena College poll shows President Biden trailing his likely Republican opponent, former President Donald J. Trump, in key battleground states. Poll respondents rate the economy poorly and say they trust Mr. Trump more to fix it. That's true even though the economy grew faster and added more jobs over the last year than forecasters expected, while inflation fell sharply from what had been a 4-decade high. In public and private conversations, and in consultation with outside economists and other experts, Mr. Biden's economic team has been consumed with that disconnect. Why do Americans remain so down on the economy when economic data are trending up? The answer is almost certainly some combination of how Americans process the economic moment and how Mr. Biden communicates about it. Democrat Gabe Amo becomes Rhode Island's first black candidate elected to Congress. The Toronto Star. Democrat Gabe Amo has won Rhode Island's first congressional district seat, making him the first black person elected to Congress from the state. Amo, a former White House aide, defeated Republican Jerry Leonard to succeed former Democratic Representative David Cicilline. Amo has said he will fight against attempts to cut funding for Social Security and Medicare, work to legalize abortion rights nationwide, combat climate change, and ban assault-style firearms. Biden administration warns of major disruption at border if judges halt asylum rule. The Toronto Star. The Biden administration is urging an appeals court to allow new asylum restrictions to remain in place, arguing that halting them would be highly disruptive at the border. The restrictions, which were introduced in July, make it more difficult to qualify for asylum if a migrant did not first apply online or seek protection in another country. The government is asking the panel of judges to overturn a ruling that sought to block the restrictions. The arguments come as Senate Republicans seek to legislate changes to asylum eligibility as part of President Biden's request for military aid to Ukraine and Israel. Leaked diplomatic memo slams unacceptable U.S. policies in Israel war. The Independent. A leaked memo from two mid-level State Department staffers argues that the U.S. has allowed unacceptable conduct by Israel to go unchecked in its war with Gaza. The memo calls for the U.S. to publicly criticize Israel for violations of international norms, and to recognize Israel's right to self-defense while condemning civilian deaths and other potential violations. The memo suggests that without such criticism, the U.S. risks being seen as a biased and dishonest actor, damaging U.S. interests worldwide. The State Department has not commented on the memo, but has said that it welcomes debate within the department. More Bukele critics join efforts seeking to nullify El Salvador leader's candidacy for re-election. The Toronto Star. There is growing opposition to the candidacy of El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele, with experts and international watchdog groups arguing that his heavy-handed moves have eroded the country's democracy and violated its constitution. They are calling on the Supreme Electoral Tribunal to reverse its acceptance of Bukele's candidacy for the February election, but the body has shown no indication that it will do so. Bukele has gained support for his crackdown on gangs, but critics say it has come at the expense of human rights and democratic principles. Biden-Xi meeting in San Francisco still on track, but no major breakthroughs expected. The Toronto Star. President Joe Biden is expected to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco, according to a person familiar with the planning. However, the White House is not anticipating major changes to the U.S.-China relationship as a result of the meeting. While the two sides may make some modest announcements, fundamental differences will remain unchanged, the person said, adding that the aim of the meeting is to open up space for further engagement and constructive work. Senator proposes plan that lifts nuclear moratorium and requires new oversight rules. Associated Press. A Republican Illinois senator proposed fresh legislation Tuesday lifting a moratorium on new nuclear reactors and calls for new rules governing them, one of the concerns raised in a gubernatorial veto of a previous version of the legislation. Supreme Court conservatives hint at a limit to gun rights. Bloomberg. The U.S. Supreme Court has been hearing arguments in a gun case, considering whether a person deemed to be dangerous, such as someone with a domestic violence order, has a right to own a firearm. Several conservative justices indicated that someone with such a history can be barred from owning a gun. The court's conservative majority last year strengthened individual gun rights, making it harder for the government to regulate firearms ownership, but left it unclear where the legal line is drawn. The current case may provide more clarity on the issue. U.S. off-year election results set to give measure of political mood. Financial Times. Off-year elections are taking place in several states across the U.S., with the results being seen as an indicator of public sentiment towards President Joe Biden as he prepares for re-election in 2024. Key races include the governor's race in Kentucky, where Democrat Andy Beshear is seeking a second term in a state that heavily favored former President Donald Trump in 2020. In Virginia, a battle for control of the state legislature will be a test for Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin. The results in Ohio could also provide insight into public sentiment on the issue of abortion. These elections come as Biden faces worsening approval ratings and polls showing him losing to Trump in key swing states. Polls close in Kentucky as Beshear hopes abortion debate hands him another term as governor. The Toronto Star. Democratic incumbent Governor Andy Beshear is hoping his support of abortion rights will persuade voters in the Republican-leaning state of Kentucky to give him a second term in office. Beshear focused his re-election campaign on warnings about the future of abortion rights, portraying his Republican challenger, Daniel Cameron, as too extreme on the issue. The results of the election will be closely watched as they may provide clues about whether voters remain energized by concerns about the future of abortion access in the U.S. Bashir's win would indicate to President Joe Biden and other Democrats that they should continue to focus on the issue in 2024. Cameron reaffirmed his support for the current Kentucky law, which bans all abortions except when carried out to save a pregnant woman's life or to prevent a disabling injury. However, he later signaled that he would support a bill adding rape and incest exceptions. Bashir's first term was dominated by his response to a series of natural disasters and the pandemic. Weiss says he had authority to pursue criminal charges against Hunter Biden. Yahoo! Special counsel David Weiss has told lawmakers that he had full authority to pursue criminal charges against Hunter Biden, according to a copy of his opening statement obtained by CBS News. Weiss, who was appointed to lead the investigation into President Joe Biden's son, said he voluntarily agreed to appear before the Republican-led House Judiciary Committee before the submission of his special counsel report. The testimony comes as Republican-led congressional investigations into Hunter Biden's finances and business ventures probe whether senior officials took any steps to obstruct or disrupt criminal investigations into Hunter Biden. Hey there, folks! It's your friendly neighborhood 6-bit coming at you with the latest news from around the world. I'm the Sixth Doctor, your trusty observer and commentator on all things newsworthy. Let's take a look at what's been happening. In Ohio, preliminary exit poll results indicate that a majority of men and women voted in favor of Issue 1, which would enshrine the right to abortion in the state's constitution. The gender gap was smaller than in the last election, and support for the measure was highest among Black and Hispanic voters. Young voters overwhelmingly supported Issue 1, while older voters were more divided. It seems that the majority of Ohio voters believe that abortion should be legal in most cases. These results highlight the ongoing debate and divide on the issue of abortion rights. In other news, investment firm BlackRock is set to invest a whopping $550 million in Occidental Petroleum's direct air capture (DAC) project. DAC aims to extract carbon emissions from the atmosphere, a significant step in the fight against climate change. However, some environmentalists question the scalability and impact of DAC technology. It's an interesting development in the battle against climate change, and only time will tell how effective DAC will be in reducing carbon emissions. Moving on to international affairs, tensions are rising in the Middle East as Israel says its forces are operating deep inside Gaza City in their battle against Hamas. The Israeli defense minister claims that Israeli soldiers have advanced to the heart of Gaza City, and that Hamas's leader is trapped in a bunker. The situation is escalating, and it's a reminder of the ongoing conflict and the challenges faced by both sides. Meanwhile, the White House has warned Israel against reoccupying Gaza, after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu suggested that Israel could hold a security role in the territory once the war is over. President Biden has said that it would be a big mistake for Israel to reoccupy Gaza. The U.S. is trying to balance its support for Israel with calls for the protection of Palestinian non-combatants and humanitarian pauses in the fighting. It's a delicate situation, and the U.S. is walking a tightrope in its approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, let's talk geopolitics. Chinese Vice President Han Zheng and Saudi Arabia's Minister of Investment Khalid Al-Falih are set to address the Bloomberg New Economy Forum in Singapore. The forum will discuss various issues including trade, climate change, energy security, and war. It's an opportunity for China to improve its strained ties with the U.S. ahead of President Biden's meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The forum will also feature discussions on economic statecraft, trade flows, and supply chains. It's a gathering of global leaders with a focus on the pressing issues of our time. Shifting gears, the transition from internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, EVs, is causing tensions around the world. The EV revolution is creating geopolitical, environmental, and societal problems. From Mexico to Thailand to Canada, the transition to EVs is disrupting established industries and raising concerns about environmental degradation. It's a reminder that progress comes with its own set of challenges and consequences. In the world of international trade, the Biden administration has suspended talks on key digital trade aspects of its Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Initiative. Negotiators from 14 countries are racing to finish agreements ahead of a major Pacific Rim summit. It's a reminder that trade negotiations are complex and can be subject to political challenges and shifts in priorities. Speaking of international relations, Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to speak at a dinner with U.S. business executives on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC) summit. The event is aimed at calming foreign investors who are increasingly nervous about doing business in China. The U.S. and China have recently engaged in talks to improve relations and address issues such as climate cooperation, nuclear arms control, and maritime concerns. It's a crucial moment in the U.S.-China relationship, and all eyes will be on the outcome of these discussions. In the South China Sea, China is using risky military behavior and coercion tactics to keep U.S. forces away from the Western Pacific. China's actions are raising the risks for foreign forces operating in the region and could potentially lead to a crisis. The situation in the South China Sea is a flashpoint in the ongoing tensions between China and the U.S. It's a reminder of the complex and delicate balance of power in the region. Now let's take a look at domestic politics. President Biden is facing challenges at home, with a New York Times/Siena College poll showing him trailing former President Trump in key battleground states. Despite positive economic indicators, Americans remain down on the economy, and Mr. Trump is seen as more capable of fixing it. The Biden administration is grappling with how to address this disconnect and effectively communicate its economic achievements. It's a reminder that perception and messaging play a crucial role in politics. In other domestic news, Democrat Gabe Amo has become Rhode Island's first black candidate elected to Congress. Amo's victory is a significant milestone for representation and diversity in Congress. It's a reminder that progress is being made, albeit slowly, in achieving a more inclusive political landscape. And finally, the Biden administration is warning of major disruption at the border if judges halt new asylum restrictions. The administration is urging an appeals court to allow the restrictions to remain in place, arguing that halting them would be highly disruptive. The issue of immigration remains a contentious one in U.S. politics, and finding a balance between border security and humanitarian concerns is a delicate task. Phew. That was a lot of news to cover. Now, I want to hear from you, my lovely audience. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Do you have any questions or opinions? Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.